Hello, Michael here from Small Robot Studio with another Renderman 24 tutorial. Today we're going to be having a look at how to render out a wireframe with Renderman, and we can also set it to a turntable. So we've got our lovely beauty render here. This is fine, but we also want to see what the wireframe looks like because we're going to put it in our portfolio. And to do that, we need to we can do it a couple of ways. Obviously, we could do a play blast, and that's fine. But we have Renderman. We might as well use it. It looks a little bit better than just doing a Maya play blast, and it gives us a few more options as well. So the first thing is, if you're just doing a still render, this is quite simple. We're just going to go to our render settings, and we'll go to our common tab. And I do always want to just make sure I'm using the correct render camera. So I'm using the render camera that I've created and set the shot up with, and also just check that the image size is correct. So HD 1080 is what I'm going to be using here. The next thing is under the Renderman tab, we need to find the integrator lobe, click on that and switch to Visualizer. By default, it should be set to shaded with wireframe. And if I hit IPR, you'll see what that looks like. So you get this will render up instantly. In fact, we can make it render up very quickly as a final render. And the way to do that is we want to go to the sampling, and at the top there we can just set the max samples to something like 4, which is a nice square number. So then if we click the final render button, you'll see that you get the render completed almost instantly, 1 second. So that's very good for us, because I will show you how to do a turntable for this as well. So if you are just saving out the single image and you're happy with that, we can always just go to File, Export File, and we can just export your file as whichever type you wish. Now there are some other options under Style. If I just run the IPR, we can turn BXDF on, and that will just show the diffused material to it. We could turn the wireframe off if we just want to see the diffused material for that. We can go to Flat Shaded, which will give it a clown matte essentially. Turn the wireframe off again. There you go. Nice clean image. Not particularly useful without the wireframe though, but maybe something that you would need. Normals will obviously display the normals. If you were doing a more composited turntable, you would maybe want to use the normals version as well. We're not going to be doing anything too complex like that. And the last one that you'll probably look at is ST. That's just going to give the ST directions of the textures on the scene. The bottle looks weird because there's obviously a UV square per polygon, I believe. Matcap is something also that you can use. You need an image to assign to it, so we need a texture in this case. So for instance, I could open up this sand texture. It doesn't really matter what you use, it will just place it all over everything after it converts to a PXR texture. And obviously this will respect your UVs as well. So if you just wanted to set everything to one color, for example, you could do it that way as well. But for this example, we want it to be set to shaded. So the next thing that we're going to do is set up a turntable. I'll just switch to my perspective camera for this and show you that the pivot position of the potion is in the center of our geometry. And to do that, you will need to put all your geometry in the one group that you want to rotate. So I'm going to be able to rotate this around the y-axis. And that can be done if it's a symmetrical mesh. That's very easy. You group it and then you just go modify and center pivot. For me, that obviously doesn't center on the where I would want it to turntable from, which would be the center of the base. This is just the normal center of the geometry. So I'm just going to set it back to where it was. And what we'll do is we'll go to frame 1. Make sure you selected your group. We'll go to rotate Y. I'm going to set that to 0, and I'll right click on it and key selected. And this is going to be a 5-second turntable. Depending on the scale of your object, you may want to make it longer or shorter, depends on you. So 5 seconds, 120 frames. So what I want to do is actually go to frame 121 right here at the end. And I'm going to set Y to 360, so it will rotate once. And then I'll right click on that and key select it again. So what will happen is frame 1 and frame 121 will be the exact same, but everything else will be rotating it. So to alleviate the fact that it is going to repeat the first and the last frame, we will just chop off the last frame, so it's 120 frames exactly now. So with that playing, you'll see that you get it rotating nicely like so. Now currently it's got an ease on it, and we can remove that by going to Windows, Animation Editor, Graph Editor. mine's docked on the bottom. I'm going to select both of those keyframes. I'm going to click this button here to linearize them. And then we can just play through there, and you'll see if I just get to the end there, it'll skip back to the start, and there is no discernible difference between where the start and end of this is. So if you're creating a nice little loop, then you could make this rotate a couple of times depending on what you're doing with the file once you're done with it. So we just need to do one final render setting here, and that is to set the frame range. So make sure that it's not just set to current frame, but animation. Start frame 1, end frame 120 in my case, yours may be longer. Ensure that you have the correct render camera selected. Go to the Renderman tab, and then under AOVs, we want to go to the beauty drop down there. Click beauty, and we want to change the display type. By default, it will be set to OpenEXR. We do not need to be compositing this. This is just going to be a straight PNG render for us. So I'm just going to set this to PNG. Normally, in compositing, we would never use a PNG, or very, very rarely you would use a PNG. But because we're not doing anything exciting here, this PNG sequence will be fine. Now, most importantly, if you haven't already set your project, make sure you set your project where your scene is located. If you do not do this, the render will go all sorts of places and you won't be able to find it. So make sure you set your project, otherwise you will not be able to find the location of the final render. So when we're ready to go, we will go to Renderman and we will go to batch render. And it will quickly run through all the frames, and then it will pop up this window, and you'll see that it's got this status bar, and these are all the individual frames being rendered, and you can see that they're pretty much going up roughly a second at a time. So 120 frames should take about 2 minutes. So I'm going to stop the recording here. I'll come back in 2 minutes and we'll have a look. Okay, so with that completed, it has come to exactly 2 minutes, which I do not believe. It felt quite a bit longer than that. And you'll see that if we scroll down here, you'll have all of your scenes. If you had any errors on any of them, you can always right click and restart the command from where it was up to. If it did error out here, you can also restart from the last task. But hopefully it went fine, and we can just open up these files now. So by default, it will end up in the images directory of your project under the folder that will create based on your file name. And you'll see here that we've got a lovely list of images. So to turn those into a movie sequence, what we'll do is we'll open it in Photoshop. So I'm just going to go File, Open, navigate to where the image sequence has been rendered out. We're going to select the first frame and we're going to click Image Sequence there. Make sure you click that, otherwise we'll just open the one frame. We'll open that up, set the frame rate, 24 frames a second. And if you do not have the timeline active, you can go to Window and open Timeline, and this will allow you to scrub through the sequence. And if I play that, you can see it plays nicely and looks exactly how I want. So now it's just a matter of going to File, Export, and Render Video. This allows us to render the video. We're going to just render this for the desktop, obviously render it somewhere meaningful, and I'll call this potion_turntable. All the other settings should be correct by default, but do just check that you're using the correct encoding for what you want, the correct resolution, frame rate, and that you are rendering the entire frame range at 0 to 119 in this case. The first frame is frame 0, so the last frame will be 119. And we'll click render. So I'll just go to the desktop, open up this image, this video, and we can just set that to repeat, so you can see that it will just repeat infinitely. Not a perfect loop using this movie player, but if I were to copy this into DaVinci Resolve, Premiere, Sony Vegas, whichever video editing suite you would want, you could just duplicate this set of images, or you could duplicate this movie render as many times as you need it to repeat. That's it for this tutorial. If you found it useful, make sure you leave a like so other people can find it. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe, as we're bringing out CG and illustration tutorials every week, just like this one. Become a patron and access tutorial assets, bonus content, a private Discord, and more by clicking the link below.